The first
You
scream
cannot
cut through the
silence
wind
the
like a
truth.
knife through wet hide.
Your actions will
Most
be your
folks in Dry
undoing.
Creek would later say they hadn't heard it. They would shrug and claim the wind had been howling too hard that night, rattling shutters and dragging dust through the streets like ghosts looking for unfinished business. Some would say a woman's scream could sound like a coyote if you weren't paying attention. Others would say nothing at all, because silence was easier than guilt. But the rancher heard it. He was standing alone at the edge of his land, boots sunk into half-frozen mud, staring at a sky so heavy with clouds it felt like it might crush the prairie flat. The wind bent the grass low, whispering secrets only the land remembered. When the scream came again, sharper this time, his jaw tightened, and his hand curled slowly into a fist. He didn't move. That moment, when he chose stillness over action, would one day cost him everything he thought he was. The town would call her a liar by morning. And when they did, the rancher would say nothing at all. She arrived in Dry Creek the same way most trouble did, quietly, and already wounded. Her name was Eliza Harrow, though for weeks afterward, people would pretend not to remember it. She stepped down from the stagecoach wearing a plain brown dress, dust-stained boots, and a coat too thin for a territory where winter could kill you faster than a bullet. Her hair was pinned up tight, as if she were afraid even loose strands might betray her. Her eyes, though, were the kind that gave her away. They carried the look of someone who had learned, too young, that the world did not care whether you survived it. The stagecoach driver barely slowed before tossing down her trunk and snapping the reins. Dry Creek was not a place people lingered if they didn't have to. She stood there alone as the coach rolled away, the sound of hooves fading into the wind. The town watched her from behind windows and doorframes. Men leaned against posts. Women paused mid-sweep. No one greeted her. No one asked where she was headed. The rancher watched too. He stood across the street, half-shadowed beneath the overhang of the mercantile, hat pulled low. His name was Jonah Hale, and he owned the largest spread for 30 miles in any direction. He was known as a hard man, but a fair one. Quiet. Reliable. The kind of man people trusted with their cattle, their money, and their secrets. He noticed details others didn't. The faint bruise at the edge of her jaw, poorly concealed by a high collar. The way her hands trembled when she reached for her trunk. The way she flinched when a man laughed too loudly nearby. She was running from something. Or someone. Jonah knew that look. He had worn it himself, once, a lifetime ago. But he said nothing. Dry Creek was a town built on survival, not kindness. It clung to the edge of the territory like a stubborn weed, half saloon, half graveyard, held together by dry wells, hard bargains, and the unspoken rule that you minded your own business or paid the price. The sheriff was more suggestion than authority, the church was more habit than faith, and the law bent easily if enough men leaned on it. By sundown, everyone knew Eliza Harrow was looking for work. By nightfall, everyone had already decided she wouldn't find it. "We don't need strangers," Mrs. Dalton said from behind the counter at the boarding house, lips thin as wire. "Especially not women without husbands." Eliza nodded politely, though the words landed like stones in her chest. "I can clean. Cook. Sew. I don't take up much space." Mrs. Dalton's eyes flicked, briefly, to the bruise. "I'm sure you don't." The door closed softly behind Eliza, but the sound echoed like a gunshot. She spent the night in the livery, curled in the hay with her coat wrapped tight, listening to horses breathe and wondering how many nights like this she had left in her bones. From his ranch, Jonah stared into the dark and tried not to think about the scream he'd heard earlier, or the way the wind seemed to carry it across the miles. The trouble started 3 days later. It was just past noon when Eliza burst into the sheriff's office, face pale, eyes wild, breath coming in sharp, broken pulls. Her dress was torn at the sleeve. Her hands were scraped raw. "He tried to kill me," she said, voice shaking but loud enough to carry. "Caldwell. Silas Caldwell." He followed me out past the creek. The room went quiet. Sheriff Mason leaned back in his chair, boot propped on the desk. Silas Caldwell was standing near the stove, warming his hands, his expression one of mild surprise. Silas was a well-known man in Dry Creek. Cattle buyer. Generous drinker. Quick with a joke and quicker with a fist if crossed. People liked him. Women were expected to endure him. "Now, miss," the sheriff said, slow and careful, "that's a serious accusation." Silas laughed softly. "I don't even know this woman." Eliza's hands clenched. "You dragged me off the road. You said no one would believe me." Eyes shifted. Throats cleared. Someone coughed. Jonah stood near the doorway, hat in hand. He had come into town for supplies and found himself rooted there, watching the scene unfold. He saw the truth in Eliza's face as plainly as if it were written in blood. He also saw the way the town leaned, almost imperceptibly, toward Silas. "Did anyone see this happen?" the sheriff asked. No one spoke. Jonah felt the weight of 100 eyes pressing down, daring him to move, to speak, to upset the balance that kept Dry Creek from tearing itself apart. If he spoke, there would be consequences. If he stayed silent, there would be others. He said nothing. The sheriff sighed. "Without witnesses, I can't act." Silas smiled. Eliza's breath hitched. "He said you'd do this." Mrs. Dalton's voice cut sharp as ice. "You ought to be ashamed, making stories like that." The word liar settled over Eliza like dust after a collapse. By the time she left the office, her name was already being erased. That night, the wind rose again, fierce and unforgiving. Eliza walked alone, head down, past the edge of town. She didn't know where she was going. Only that staying felt more dangerous than leaving. Her ribs ached. Her heart felt hollowed out. She didn't see Silas until it was too late. The scream tore out of her before she could stop it. From his land, Jonah heard it. This time, he ran. The distance felt endless, each step a battle against memory, fear, and the terrible understanding that he had already failed her once. When he reached the edge of the creek, he saw shadows struggling, heard a man curse, heard Eliza cry out again. Jonah charged. Silas fell back with a shout as Jonah's fist connected, hard and unforgiving. The fight was brutal and brief. Silas ran, bleeding and swearing vengeance into the dark. Eliza collapsed to her knees, shaking. Jonah stood there, breath ragged, hands stained red, staring at the woman he should have protected days ago. She looked up at him, eyes filled not with gratitude, but something far more dangerous. Hope. By morning, the town would hear a different story. Silas would claim the rancher attacked him unprovoked. The sheriff would have questions. Dry Creek would demand answers. And Jonah Hale would learn that doing the right thing too late could be more devastating than never doing it at all. The truth would cost him his land, his name, and the quiet life he had built from ashes. But for now, as dawn crept pale and cold across the prairie, Jonah helped Eliza to her feet, knowing that nothing in Dry Creek would ever be the same again. The sun rose hard and cold over Dry Creek, like it had no patience left for mercy. By the time Jonah and Eliza reached the edge of town, whispers were already moving faster than they were. Windows opened. Doors creaked. Eyes followed them with the sharp curiosity reserved for scandal and blood. Eliza walked close to Jonah, her steps uneven, one hand pressed against her bruised ribs. She did not look up. She had learned that looking invited judgment. Jonah felt every stare like a brand on his back. He had lived his life quietly, believing that if a man worked hard, kept his word, and minded his business, the land would meet him halfway. That belief was beginning to crack, thin lines spreading through it like ice on a river. Sheriff Mason was waiting when they reached the office. Silas Caldwell stood beside him, a bandage wrapped loosely around his forehead, his eye already swelling dark. The injury looked dramatic enough to tell a convincing lie. "Hale," the sheriff said. "Care to explain why you assaulted a respected citizen last night?" Jonah didn't answer right away. He looked at Eliza instead. She was trembling, but she met his eyes, silently asking the question that mattered most. "Will you speak now?" "I stopped him from killing her," Jonah said finally. The room went still. Silas let out a laugh that sounded rehearsed. "He's gone soft, Mason. Woman got into his head. Attacked me like a mad dog." "That's a lie," Eliza said, her voice cracking but loud. "He followed me. Twice. I told you." Mrs. Dalton crossed her arms. "First she says Caldwell attacked her alone. Now Hale's involved. Funny how stories grow." Jonah felt heat rise in his chest. "She didn't grow anything. You just didn't want to hear it." Eyes turned on him, sharp and surprised. Jonah Hale didn't challenge people. Not like this. Sheriff Mason rubbed his jaw. "Jonah, you know how this looks." Jonah did know. A powerful rancher. A woman without a husband. A known man bleeding in the room. The truth sat in the corner like something no one wanted to claim. "I'm taking her to my ranch," Jonah said. The words were out before he could stop them. Eliza's head snapped up. Silas smiled slowly. "That so?" The sheriff hesitated. "You're offering protection?" "I'm offering safety," Jonah replied. "Same thing," Silas said. "Unless you're lying too." The town murmured. In Dry Creek, protection always came with a price. Jonah's ranch lay miles away, stretched wide under a sky that offered no shelter and no forgiveness. The land was rough, scarred by drought and wind, but it had fed him for years. It had been his refuge, his excuse, his silence. As they rode out, Eliza finally spoke. "You didn't believe me before," she said quietly. Jonah swallowed. "I did." "Then why didn't you say anything?" The question struck deeper than any accusation thrown in town. "Because I thought if I stayed out of it, it would pass," he said. "I was wrong." Eliza nodded once. She didn't forgive him. Not yet. But she didn't pull away either. The ranch house was simple. Sturdy. Built by a man who expected storms. Jonah set Eliza up in the spare room, lit the stove, and brought water. "You can stay as long as you need," he said. Eliza looked around, wary. "And what do you want in return?" Jonah met her gaze. "Nothing." She almost laughed. Almost. Silas Caldwell did not like being denied. By the third day, word spread that Jonah Hale was hiding a woman on his land. By the fifth, men stopped returning his greetings in town. By the seventh, buyers hesitated. Prices dropped. Debts whispered their names. The bank sent a letter. The sheriff rode out with questions. "This town's turning on you," Mason warned. "You're making enemies." Jonah stared across his fields. They were always there. "Hand her over," the sheriff said quietly. "Let her leave. This dies down." Jonah shook his head. "It doesn't die. It just finds another woman." Mason sighed. "Then I can't protect you." Jonah watched him ride away, dust trailing behind like a bad omen. Inside the house, Eliza listened. She had lived her whole life as a burden passed from hand to hand, blamed for the weight of men's sins. Watching Jonah stand his ground stirred something painful and unfamiliar in her chest. Hope had teeth. One night, a storm rolled in without warning. Wind tore at the house. Thunder cracked the sky open. Rain came down so hard it flattened the land. Eliza woke gasping, the memory of hands on her throat clawing up from her dreams. She found Jonah sitting at the table, lamp low, jaw clenched. "They burned the south fence," he said. Fear flared. "Silas?" Jonah nodded. "You should let me go," Eliza whispered. "This isn't your fight." Jonah looked at her for a long moment. "It became my fight the moment I stayed quiet." Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, something fragile and dangerous took root between them. By morning, Jonah's cattle were scattered. His land damaged. His losses mounting. Dry Creek was making its choice. And Eliza understood something terrible and true. The town wouldn't stop until one of them broke. Dry Creek did not come all at once. It came in pieces. First, it was the buyers who stopped riding out. Cattle stood ready, healthy and strong, but no one came with money or contracts. Jonah watched weeks of work turn useless beneath an empty sky. The land didn't betray him. People did. Then came the bank. The letter was short, polite, and merciless. Outstanding debt. Reassessment of risk. Immediate repayment required. The paper felt heavier than iron in Jonah's hands. Eliza stood across the room when he read it. She didn't ask what it said. She already knew. "They're strangling you," she whispered. Jonah folded the letter slowly. "They're hoping I'll let go." "Of me." He didn't answer, and that hurt more than if he had agreed. The sheriff returned 2 days later, alone this time, hat in his hands. "I tried," Mason said. "But Silas has friends. Money. The kind of men who don't like being embarrassed." "He tried to kill her," Jonah said. Mason nodded. "I believe you." Belief, Jonah learned, was cheap when it came without action. "There's talk of charges," Mason continued. "Assault. Disorderly conduct. Maybe worse if they push hard enough." Eliza stiffened. "Against him?" The sheriff's eyes dropped. "Against you, Hale." The room went quiet. Jonah felt something settle in his chest, heavy and cold. He had always known this was coming. Knowing didn't make it easier. "What happens to her?" Jonah asked. Mason hesitated. "Town says she leaves. Today. Alone." Eliza's breath caught. Jonah shook his head. "No." Mason looked tired. "Then I can't stop what's coming." When the sheriff left, the house felt smaller, like the walls were inching closer. "I'll go," Eliza said suddenly. "Before they take everything from you." Jonah turned on her. "And then what? You think they'll let you live in peace?" "They'll forget me," she said. "They always do." Jonah slammed his fist on the table. "They won't forget what they did if you disappear." Eliza flinched at the sound, old fear flashing across her face. Jonah softened instantly, guilt twisting sharp. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. I won't send you back into that." She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time saw the cost carved deep into his features. The loneliness. The years of surviving instead of living. "Why?" she asked. "Why is this worth it to you?" Jonah struggled for the words. "Because someone once stayed quiet when I needed them not to." The confession hung between them, raw and unfinished. That night, torches appeared on the ridge. Eliza saw them first, small flickers of fire moving slowly, deliberately. Men on horseback. Too many to count. "Jonah," she whispered. He stepped outside, rifle in hand, heart pounding but steady. They didn't attack. They waited. Silas rode forward alone, firelight dancing across his face. He smiled like a man enjoying a long game. "You've made your point," Silas called. "Now end this. Send her away." Jonah said nothing. You think you're better than us, Silas continued. But you're just as alone. Always have been. Jonah raised his rifle, not to shoot, but to show he would not bend. Silas's smile faded. Burn the north shed. Flames leapt up fast, hungry and bright. Eliza cried out. Jonah ran, fighting fire with dirt and desperation, but the wind was against him. The shed collapsed, taking years of work with it. When it was over, Silas rode away without another word. The message was clear. In the ashes of the shed, Eliza knelt, hands shaking. This is my fault, she said. Everywhere I go, things burn. Jonah knelt beside her. That fire wasn't you. She looked up, tears streaking dirt across her face. Then why do I feel like I'm poisoning everything I touch? Jonah didn't answer. He reached out instead, resting his hand over hers, grounding them both in the cold truth of the moment. For the first time, Eliza didn't pull away. Days later, a stranger arrived. A woman, older, wrapped in a weather-beaten shawl, riding a tired horse. She introduced herself as Annika Larson, her accent thick and unmistakable. I heard what's happening here, Annika said. And I've seen Silas Caldwell ruin women before. Eliza's heart raced. You'll speak? Annika nodded slowly. I tried once. No one listened. Maybe now they will. Hope flared again, fragile but fierce. But Silas heard too. And Silas did not forgive witnesses. The next morning, Annika's horse returned alone. Fear spread like poison through Jonah's veins. They found Annika hours later, injured but alive, hidden near the creek. Beaten. Silenced, but not broken. He said no one would believe me either, Annika whispered. Eliza felt something harden inside her, something stronger than fear. They weren't alone anymore. They were targets. Dry Creek gathered like a storm that had finally decided to break. Word spread fast once Annika Larson was found alive. Not because people cared about what had been done to her, but because fear has a way of sharpening attention. 2 women now carried the same story. 2 broken voices saying the same name. Silas Caldwell. The town didn't rush to believe them. It hesitated. That hesitation was new. Jonah felt it when he rode into town with Eliza and Annika beside him, their horses moving slow, deliberate. People came out of buildings. Not with smiles. Not with accusations. With something more dangerous. Uncertainty. Sheriff Mason stood in the street, jaw tight. You're forcing this, he said quietly. Jonah dismounted. It was forced the moment you looked away. Silas appeared near the saloon, calm as ever, though his eyes burned. This ends today, he said. One way or another. Annika's voice shook but carried. He beat me for speaking once. He did it again for trying. Eliza stepped forward. Her fear was still there, but it no longer ruled her. And he tried to kill me because he knew this town would help him. Silence fell. Then a man spoke. Then another. A third woman stepped out from the crowd, face pale, hands clenched. He followed me too. Something cracked. Silas moved fast. Too fast. A gunshot split the air. Jonah felt the impact before the sound made sense. Pain bloomed sharp and hot in his side as he hit the dirt. Chaos erupted. Shouting. Horses rearing. The sheriff fired back. Silas ran. He didn't get far. The town watched him fall. Jonah survived. But survival came with its own reckoning. The bank took the land. The ranch was gone before the blood dried. Dry Creek did not apologize. It simply adjusted, like a body shedding a limb to save itself. Eliza stayed with Jonah while he healed. So did Annika. They were no longer invisible. Not fully accepted. But no longer alone. One morning, Eliza packed her things. "You're leaving," Jonah said, not a question. "No," she replied softly. "I'm staying. Just, not as someone being hidden." She took his hand. "You lost everything because you chose to speak too late, but loud enough." Jonah swallowed. "I'd do it again." Eliza smiled, small and real. "I know." They left Dry Creek together weeks later. Not as fugitives. Not as victims. As survivors. The town faded behind them, smaller with every mile. Ending line. And as the land stretched wide before them, Jonah understood the truth had cost him his past, but it had finally given him a future worth standing for.